So thank you for being a part of that initial launch of Faith Story. It has been incredible. So just the response, the support, the encouragement, the fact that we are able to reach you wherever you are, because that really is the point of Faith Story. And that's why we started this. So for every single person that has messaged, for those who have sent that encouragement, and especially those who've shared, like, I can't tell you how much Jess and I really appreciate that support. And so we are building that different kind of community and engagement. And part of that is our mailing list. So for everyone that did subscribe, it probably landed in your junk mailbox, and I hope you went and checked, and I know a lot of you did, and we are working on that, but please just check your junk folder. It's not junk, so move it out of there, because that's where we want to take what happens on a weekly basis in this video message through the week. And I know you're probably not going to get through all of it. It is a lot, and that was the point. But for those who have the time, you can go for it. The more time you invest in it, the more you're going to get out of it, because it really is about your personal relationship with the Lord. And so if you haven't subscribed yet, hit pause, go and subscribe, and then carry on watching. So don't wait till the end of the message, although we will remind you again, you can do it now. That's the beauty of this. But I also just want to encourage you, please continue pushing and being serious about your faith story, because it really is about your relationship with the Lord, and how that fundamental, most important relationship is going to affect every single other relationship and everything else in your life, which is why our faith story is so important. So our changing stories have a lot to do, not just with our circumstances, but also with the consequences that we're having to deal with. And circumstances, well, they might be very quick in the work that they do, especially in the extremes. But with consequences, well, this is deep work, but it's also long work. So this is going to take a lot more time, and it sits a whole lot deeper, but it is incredible work that God is able to do. So when we look at the things that we are having to deal with, the very first thing is we probably have to destigmatize the poor word of consequences, because it gets such a bad rap. Is whenever you say consequences, it sort of has this like, oh, that's bad, it's negative, or what did they do? But that's not what the word means. It's neutral. So we have to be able to see that there are negative consequences that are connected to poor choices, but there are also positive consequences that are connected to good and healthy and godly choices. And having both of those is necessary for us to be able to see how God is going to use consequences in our changing story. So it's not that consequences are going to be a power of their own. They live in a different space, because you have to deal with the consequence in the now because of the past. And there is a basic fundamental principle. And that principle is you reap what you sow. It's not a nice principle, but it's one that can't be broken. So whether you want to believe that what you're dealing with is a result of your past choices or not, whether you want to believe that what you're dealing with is a result of the choices of others that are close to you and that affect you, whether you want to believe it or not is irrelevant, because the principle will remain. And that is, there is a result to your choices. So in order for us to see what that result is, well, we've got to be able to understand where the root of this principle lies. It's not a airy-fairy, like strange, like, oh, we don't know why this is happening kind of thing. It's not random. Our circumstances, yes, we are affected perhaps by some random things about what's going on in the world. Now, this is very much linked to something that is understandable, something that we have control over, and something that we have to know about. Because your consequences, when you boil it down, it's fundamentally an obedience issue. Did you listen or didn't you? That's what it comes down to. And when we can see that what we're dealing with to a large degree in our lives from a consequence perspective is actually linked to obedience, well, then we can start gaining a bit more control over that. So one of my girls, and I'm hoping that she will be able to remain anonymous throughout this message, one of my girls did something that she shouldn't have done. She kicked one of her sisters. And yes, that does happen even with the pastor's kids. So this happened. And the three girls came home, and it was very somber, and they were like going to tell me this big news. And so it started unfolding, and they tell me. Then I'm standing like, yeah, this is quite serious. And like, now it's one of those parenting moments. So you're like, now what do I do? Because I can't just let this slide. There has to be a consequence. So fortunately, two of the girls, the two that were involved, the kicker and the kicked, they had some birthday money and they had ordered something on Takealot, and they had drawn up a chart counting the days of when it's going to arrive, and they were super excited about it. And I remembered this other basic principle, which is a parenting principle, that toys are an incredible discipline tool. I know that sounds like it shouldn't be, but they really are. So when your children are excited about something, it becomes an opportunity to mold and shape and change behavior. And it's parenting leverage. So I said to the one that kicked, I said, unfortunately, because of what you've done and because of the seriousness of it, when the toys arrive, you are going to have to wait an extra day. So you're not going to be able to play with your toy on the day that it arrives. And you could see the disappointment. Like it was proper. So a couple of days later, and she comes to me and I'm in the kitchen. She says, Dad, is there maybe something that I can do so that I can play with my toy when it arrives? Can I maybe do something good, like tidy my room or pick up my clothes or make my bed? So I was like, no, you need to tidy your room and pick up your clothes and make your bed. That's not going to change anything. And then I explained to her and I said, do you know what you could do to change this? Is you could go back and not kick your sister. So obviously she realizes, well, she can't do that. So I said, or you can make it so that your sister didn't feel that she got hurt at all. Can you do that? And she says, no, she can't do that. So I said, so unfortunately, the consequence is going to have to remain. And this clever little child, she looks at me and says, or I could just make you forget. And I was like, no, don't do that, because you will still remember and so will your sister. Now, here's the thing about consequences. Yes, it's an obedience issue. No, you can't go back and change what has happened in the past, but you can learn from it. And that's the point. So God allows us the freedom of choice, but he doesn't allow us the freedom of consequence. So we have to still deal with the consequence. But what's the key? So the key is There are physical, natural consequences that you have to deal with. But there is another level to it. Because in that moment, when she's busy speaking to me in the kitchen, what remains? She's still talking to me. I'm still engaging with her. I'm not angry. I'm not cross. I'm still pleasant. Our relationship is still intact, despite the fact that she still has to deal with the consequence. In fact, her relationship with her sister is still intact, because that is the essence of what life is about. It's not about our circumstances or the consequences. Those are temporary. Those things are going to come and go and fade, and she's probably not even going to remember what toy it was that she had ordered that she had to wait for. But her character would have been molded. And in our core relationships, that is the essence of why God allows us to deal with the physical consequences and why He doesn't just miraculously remove them. Because He knows that the work that it's going to do on our character is vital. And in fact, is probably going to do the greatest work. But it doesn't affect our relationships. So in those relationships, the relationship remains intact, even though you're having to deal with the consequence. If you have to look at what the effect is, especially of negative consequences. And I understand why we remember the negative, because we are biased towards that. Something good happens, you forget about it. Something bad happens at the same degree, the same level, you're going to remember it. So in our relationships, when you have an issue and you've got something that you are dealing with, or worse, there's a consequence that you are trying not to deal with, one that you're trying to deny and ignore, it affects your relationships because you're hiding something. So, and the more core that relationship is, the more it's going to affect it. In the ultimate, the most fundamental relationship that we have is our relationship with the Lord. So that is, you need to fear God, which is that reverence, that respect, that I want to please you more than anyone and anything else. Like you are the most important. Fear God above all else. In that relationship, it needs ultimate transparency. You need to own every single one of your consequences. Be real and truthful and honest about it. And then in your next most core, closest relationships, you need to own as much as possible. Be as transparent as possible. I'm not going to say that you need to be 100% transparent with everyone and everything. That would be weird. So don't do that. It's going to be unhealthy. But in your relationship with God, so here's the key. And I know this is going to sound silly, and I don't want it to come across condescending in any way, because I fall into that same trap. We try and hide things from Him as if He doesn't know. So we try and avoid. So you do something, you feel guilty about something, and then you don't want to pray. Then you don't want to engage. You don't want to listen to the message. You don't want to take those steps forward spiritually because you feel bad, as if you can hide it from God. I remember a core moment in my walk with the Lord. I had just become a Christian. So I was a Christian for maybe 2-3 years, and I was working through my stuff, and I was spending time over a period of time, starting to go through those layers. The ones that you're not that embarrassed about, those are the easy ones. So you quickly can go and pray and ask God for forgiveness for these things and talk to Him about it and be open and honest. But the deeper ones, the ones that you don't tell anybody else, the ones that you are genuinely embarrassed about, well, those are the ones that are tough. And it takes a long time to get there. And if you're going to consistently spend that time with the Lord, with the intention of wanting to open up and to own what it is that you need to own and deal with those things. And I remember distinctly, I was going layer by layer, and I had gotten to sort of like one of the last layers, the last one that I was conscious of at that time. And I spoke to the Lord about it. And I walked out of my office that day, and I literally felt like the weight of the world was off my shoulders. And I distinctly remember thinking to myself, I have nothing to hide. I've spoken to the Lord about everything. And yes, again, it's just that silly human thinking. I could acknowledge and admit to myself and believe He knows everything. Obviously, He knows everything, but now I believe it. So here's what I want us to do. With the negative consequences, we need to own them. Don't ignore them. It's difficult. It's tough to go and to delve into those and to be emotionally vulnerable in those situations. But you've got to do it, because it's like carrying this heavy bag around with you, and you've got all of these issues and all of these things that you're trying to hide in the bag. So no one can see what's in the bag, but whether you can see it or not, it's still just as heavy. And so I want to encourage you, just open the bag. So you're going to go do this with the Lord first. You're going to go speak to Him about what's in the bag. But ultimately, in reality, you're going to have to go and open that bag. And you're going to have to take the stuff out, because there's a lot in there that affects the people around you. Things that have not been dealt with. Open the bag, take it out, and put it on display. If there's somebody that you need to go and speak to and say, listen, I know that I've hurt. I know that I shouldn't have. I know that what I did, you disappointed, and I've been carrying it. They've probably forgotten, but it's good for you. Just go. Deal with it. And you know what the beauty is? Once you've opened it and taken it out and laid it on the road, you don't have to pick it up again. You get to pick the bag up, because unfortunately, we all have to take that bag with. We all have to carry our own burden. But it's going to be a lot lighter. And then what you get to do is, once you've owned the negative things and dealt with them, well, then we have to go and find the positive consequences in our lives. Because there are other things that you have done. There are choices that you have made, and they're not as obvious, because positive consequences, they're strange. It's almost as if they're a lot quieter. They go by unnoticed, like they're shy. They remind me of the IT guy. So you know the IT guy, when the internet's working, nobody bothers about the IT guy. It's like you hit print and it comes out on the printer and it's perfect, no glitch. It's exactly how you wanted it. You pick it up, you walk away. You don't say to yourself, oh, I'm going to go find the IT guy. I'm going to interrupt his day and I'm going to make such a huge fuss to thank him. No, you're not going to do that. But when it's not working, well, then you're going to probably interrupt him badly. So the positive things, go and find them. Spend some time genuinely asking yourself, what are the choices that I have made that have had a positive impact? Then repeat them. So all of the excess units that you now have, because you're not carrying this massive load anymore, because you've dealt with some of the negative stuff, you can now use those excess energy units and life units to implement more of the positive things. So you want to ultimately do less of the negative and you want to do more of the positive. That's the basic plan. And when you do that, well, that's when you realize that your relationships are going to benefit from those choices that you make. That the consequences ultimately, little bit by little bit, you're going to be building into the positive consequences. Because what God promises is that He's never ever going to be fooled. You're not going to get away with things. You might think that initially, those that are making poor choices, that they do get away with it. And yes, superficially, it might look like that. But in reality, no. And ultimately, never. We are all going to have to deal with our choices on a physical, practical level. The promise that God has given is that spiritually, our relationship with Him, the consequence has been taken care of. So in all of the things where we have fallen short from God's standard, where there should be a spiritual and an eternal consequence, well, that's why God sent His Son into the world, to deal with that consequence. So it's been paid for. Therefore, we don't carry it in our bags anymore. And that moment of understanding that God is not unhappy with me, the relationship is still there. But that doesn't mean that He's going to take away the practical and the physical consequences of my choices. He's going to use those in the most important way so that He can mold and change my character, which is eternal, by using temporary circumstances. And so we can start having a different perspective on consequences, because obviously the positive consequences are going to be beneficial in our lives. But believe it or not, when your story is part of God's faith story that He is busy writing, well, even the negative consequences will be used for your benefit, because God will do probably the greatest work ever in those moments, in turning that around and allowing you to see that He is able to use all things for the good. And sometimes He's able to use the bad things for the good, even greater way. So that our story is going to be the story that God wants to write. And I want to encourage you, deal with it. Don't deny it. Don't delay. Whatever it is, go and confront it, confess it, first to the Lord, and then let Him lay on your heart as to who needs that transparency and that honesty from you. Because your relationships are what really matter in this life. And God is going to emphasize that, and He's going to encourage that, and He's going to support that every single time. Empty that bag and keep on walking on this road that the Lord has you on, so that your life will bring Him glory.